Welcome to the EAZA Animal Welfare webinar, as I say, the first one of 2024. The idea is that the webinar will be about 45 minutes of presentation, and then we've got 15 minutes for questions. I will be collating questions as we go through the webinar, so if you could please send me your questions as and when they come to you via a direct message in the chat, and then let me know if you would like to come on and say that, or if you would like me to present it on your behalf. If you do have any technical problems, we're joined today by Sally Binding. I'll pop Sally's details in the chat in just a moment. Please do make a note of her email address. If you get booted out or anything like that, we can get you back in. Okay, so without further ado, so that we stick to time, it gives me great pleasure today to introduce Elly Neumann. Elly is going to be talking to us today about using enrichment within zoos and actually thinking from the practical side of things, how can we implement those goal-based enrichment strategies within our practice? So Elly has been working in the zoo world for the last 24 years. She spent 20 years at Taronga Zoo in Australia, where she was a senior keeper and trainer, and she was a course facilitator at the Taronga Training Institute. And while she was there, she developed and taught courses in animal care, animal welfare, training and enrichment. Currently, Elly is working at Jerusalem Zoo in Israel, and she is the coordinator of welfare, training and enrichment there. She also does lots of things within EAZA, so she's on the Animal Welfare Working Group, and she's an EEP coordinator for the Nubian Ibex. And she's president-elect of the ABMA, as well as a number of other working groups along the EAZA side as well. So, Elly, if you want to come back onto our screen and away you go. If anybody has any questions, please drop them in the chat, and thanks, Elly, for your time.
Great. Thank you, Ellen and Sally, for having me today. I'm really excited to be spending this time talking to everyone a little bit about, I guess, enrichment and zoos. And as we go through today, we'll sort of see where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. If anyone has any questions for it at the end, please, as Ellen said, to put it into the chat, and hopefully we can have some really good questions and discussions from that, and then keep the conversation going after this. So basically what I would like to discuss today and present today is a few different things in relation to enrichment in zoos and where we are. So as you can see there, I was going to start talking about this connection between enrichment and welfare. We're going to look at a little bit about how enrichment has evolved, what it means, where it's come from, where we are right now and where it's going. Talk a little bit about how we can create enrichment programs within our zoos. What are some of the different ways of doing it? Also the people side of enrichment. Yes, it is about the animals, but there is also a people side to it and how to be most effective. And then I've got a little bit of slide with a bit of resources at the end that you can all take away with you as well. So the idea today is to really just take a bit of a stock of where we're at with enrichment, where we'd like to go, and how we can keep moving forward, because it is a bit of a process and a bit of a journey moving forward. So I did want to start a little bit today to talk a bit about the role of a modern zoo and modern zookeepers, and why it's important to understand what our role is in this industry, because if we don't know where we are, it's really hard to understand where we're going. So if we look at what a modern zoo is, we really emphasize animal welfare, we emphasize education, public perception and conservation. And really in terms of the animals, it's this emphasis on psychological needs, not just their physical needs. And we look at the behavioural management and how we look after behaviour and manage behaviour within a zoo as a husbandry basic. This is what we really understand now. We also like to take this holistic approach to animal care. So as we look at welfare further on, it's not just about feeding animals or nutrition or making sure we can keep them alive. It's this holistic approach that understands as a husbandry basic for them. In a modern zoo, we are also proactive. We really want to take a proactive approach to welfare, enrichment and training as part of our core foundations of looking after our animals as well. If we look at them as a modern zookeeper, people working in zoos, whether it is a zookeeper, or whether you're in management or whether you're coordinating programs or whatever you are within the industry, We traditionally used to have these routines and schedules, what we needed to do for the animals, but now we really understand that we need to understand their behavior. We need to understand these insights into different animals and individuals and species to make sure that we can look after them, and understanding how those working with them impact animals' behavior. As a modern zookeeper, we like to ask questions with our animals' behavior in mind. What are these animals doing in the wild? What are they doing here? How are they spending their time? And we like to be able to plan for that and understand it, as well as observing our animals. We want to observe, we want to plan, we want to record. And one of the great things I think about being a modern zookeeper is this access to this wider animal community. We really have a bigger community than we used to. So I think it's quite an exciting time to be involved in the zoo industry. One of the biggest things we see with enrichment and welfare at the moment is that it is an organizational-wide challenge. We're all involved in this journey to develop improved welfare. We all need to speak the same welfare language. And one of the things that you can try to do is go out to everyone in your zoo, speak to the other keepers, speak to your managers, speak to the person at the gift shop, and ask them what they think animal welfare is. Because I think one of the most interesting things is what everyone in your organization says. Are we all saying the same thing? Do we all understand welfare to be the same thing? Enrichment to be the same thing? Or are we all not talking the same language? When we start talking about enrichment now, as we move through, we can see that we would like some common welfare and enrichment goals. And the reason I called this title of this presentation or this webinar From Science to Section is because we really are beginning to really understand the science. We're getting a lot of information from everywhere. As our keepers, our managers, we all know the science. We're understanding the science. But how do we bring that science down to the animals? How do we bring that and implement it? How do we practically implement the programs to promote positive welfare? So as we go through today, just think about all that in terms of enrichment as we're discussing it. So it's always fun to start with a couple of definitions, and there are a lot of definitions out there, so I won't leave you to read them and go into it too much. But one of the two things we really need to understand as we move through is what is welfare and what is enrichment. And we're going to look at how they tie together and some of the ways that we can practically implement some of the things we discuss. So when we start defining enrichment, there's a lot of definitions out there. Sorry, I should say welfare. There's a lot of definitions out there, but we're talking about the subjective state of an animal, the quality of their life as experienced by that individual animal, how they are coping at any given moment in time. And we know that welfare encompasses mental and physical health of an individual, how they engage with their physical environment, their social environment, and do they have these opportunity to exhibit control over their environment or choices in their environment. And so when we start looking at welfare as defined as that, that's where enrichment comes into it, because enrichment allows animals to have those positive welfare goals. So I've put two definitions of enrichment over there. There are quite a few. The first one, and you can see when you compare both of them together, you can almost see that they have a lot of things in common. So the first one is from wild enrichment. It's a definition, behavioural enrichment, to providing species appropriate challenges for animals, dynamic environments, cognitive challenges. And the bottom one's from EAZA, and you can see similar things, providing animals with the opportunities for natural behaviours, behavioural choices. So we can see where it's all starting to tie together between enrichment and welfare. So one of the things, this link between welfare and enrichment, is we do have this shift now to an understanding of animals not just surviving, but thriving. For keepers to understand what that means and to be able to understand the science and implement it is really, really important. And we do know that research tells us that when animals have meaningful and varied enrichment, it does lead to better welfare. And there's a number of papers out there. Hopefully we can send out some references to that. But if you literally go and Google enrichment research, enrichment and welfare, you can see so much research out there, and it's all telling us that purposeful, meaningful enrichment does lead to better welfare standards. So when we talk about welfare, we often talk about what inputs we are presenting to animals. And today we're going to start looking a little bit about how we can talk about the outputs first. Now, what do we mean by inputs and outputs? Well, inputs are what we can give our animals, what we can give animals to provide, I guess, positive welfare outcomes. So things such as, I've given a few input examples there on the slide. Enrichment is an input. We provide our animals with enrichment, or we provide our animals with habitat choice or food. The output is what they do with it. And that's how we are measuring welfare, what they are doing in that environment. So for example, we provide enrichment for our animals. The output is the behavior. What are they doing? We provide food. What is their body condition and their health? What are they using with it? And that's how we end up with what, I guess, our welfare understanding of the animals. And so the whole point of today is to look at us moving away from really looking at the inputs, but actually focusing on the outputs. Can we focus on the animal's behavior to determine what is the best way of providing enrichment for them and leading towards positive welfare outcomes? So I did want to go through a little bit about the history of enrichment and how it's involved. But before we get there, I wanted to give some sort of key concepts when looking at enrichment and welfare together. So I don't want to go into too many details, but just so we can understand how our environment that an animal lives in, also their behavior, how that all plays a role in welfare. So when we look at animals within the zoo, sometimes it's the difference between a static versus a dynamic environment. In those definitions before on enrichment, I think two of them mentioned dynamic environment. So we know that enrichment can increase an animal's ability to cope with challenges within their environment, or the challenges of being within a zoo if there are. It gives animals opportunities to perform species-appropriate and species-specific behaviors. Now, in most cases, or in some cases, I should say, but a lot, if we don't provide the animals that opportunity to do those specific behaviors, they might not be able to. So a great example is people who have indoor enclosures with lizards. The natural behavior is warming themselves out in the sun. Now, if we don't take them out into the sun or give them access to the sun, they don't get that opportunity. An example might be an otter diving for food. If we're not providing them that opportunity to dive and hunt for food within a captive environment, they won't get it. So really, enrichment is that way of making sure that our environments are dynamic and we're giving our animals opportunities to do those natural behaviors. Another concept, which I'm not going to go into too much, but you'll see it mentioned a couple of times, is this idea of contra-free loading, which is a behavior in which an animal, when offered a choice between being provided food or food that needs effort to obtain, they usually prefer the food that requires the effort. And that was originally studied by Glenn Jensen in 1963 with rats. But we see it now in a lot of animals. There's been a lot of studies in mice and birds and fish and primates. And we all see that animals are preferring to work or do something or use their behavior to get food rather than just having it freely access. And I think there's a big difference when we look at our animals within a zoo, an animal eating or an animal using their natural behaviors to find and forage and hunt for that food. We know that the animals have an intrinsic need to perform certain behaviors when it comes to eating. And so if we don't provide them with that, they don't get that opportunity. Predictability is something big we'll see as we move on throughout the webinar. Something big that, you know, if you don't have enough predictability, that can lead to anxiety or even aggression. If you have too much predictability, we can get anticipatory behaviors or schedule-induced behaviors, reduced activity budgets because our animals are spending time anticipating what's coming next rather than doing that what comes natural to them. So predictability can be really important when we talk about enrichment and welfare. So is behavioural diversity. As we move on, you'll see we talk a lot about different behaviours that animals can do in the wild. How can they do these behaviours when they're in our care? Another concept, resilience and challenges. Resilience is a great one, and it's something that we're talking a lot about in the zoo world at the moment. How do we build this coping ability for animals to overcome challenges? How can they return, like even if they have something that is a negative experience or a scary experience or something in their environment, how can they return to that baseline of being calm? And that's resilience. So as we move through, we'll bring that up as a concept as well. The famous choice and control, which are actually two separate things at the moment, but we're going to look at how we can use that within enrichment and welfare and how we can use it to the animal's advantage. We know with choices, like us personally as humans, we make on average 35,000 conscious choices a day, they say. I've tried to work that out actually, but I can't, but that's what the research says. So if we stop for a moment and think about how many choices your animals make each day and write them down, it's quite interesting to see that there's not that many choices that they have to make. Some places, sometimes, yes, they do, but a lot of the time, they've lost that opportunity to make that choice. We've made it for them. So choices are whether it's to interact with the environment, to act socially, to solve problems, we've taken that opportunity away. So how can we give it back to them? And same thing as control as another thing. Whereas choice lets an animal react to its environment, control allows the animal to actively change its environment. And that's a really hard thing to provide control, but I see a lot in the industry that we're bringing control back to our animals and different ways of doing that. So we're going to go through some different ideas today, but just as a key concepts to see the 4 different areas, or 3 plus an extra one at the end I've put there, why enrichment is such an important thing to be talking about, and how it's constantly changing, but we need to keep talking about it, and how we can improve welfare through enrichment. So we can encourage desired behaviors through enrichment. So I've put a few different examples there, whether it's shifting, relationship building, we spoke about resilience. You know, we talk about breeding behaviors and nest building, etc., or social feeding. When we look at it a bit later, when we look at it as behavior-based, if we're trying to encourage desired behaviors such as nest building, let's say, a lot of times we will provide, you know, nesting material for the animal, but then we've lost that ability for the animal to actually search for it or pick it themselves. So we really want to start thinking a bit deeper about these desired behaviors and what takes a part of it. When we look at solving undesired behaviors, we can start looking at, you know, why are animals doing these behaviors? What's the motivation behind them? Can we encourage other behaviors with that same motivation rather than just stopping them doing the behaviors that might be undesired? We know that enrichment provides improved welfare indicators. The research does show us that. So we see reduced stress, increased playfulness, increased expression of natural behaviors. And we do know that this does indicate positive welfare outcomes. So we definitely are on the right track with enrichment, and we just need to make sure and find out how we can do it well and do it properly. So the last thing I put there was these enrichment foundations, and I'll probably repeat them a few times because I think they're really important. So I think I mentioned it before, we're aiming for thriving, not just surviving. It's really important to understand the natural biology of animals and the species and the individual, and we'll look at how we do that. How can we provide challenge, choice, and control? And also to really start understanding what's just good husbandry and what is enrichment, because I think now our basic good husbandry is what enrichment used to be. So everything now, it's enriched husbandry. The way we look after our animals is with that enriched environments in mind. So what I thought I would do now quickly is just run through a bit of the history of enrichment so we can understand where it's come from, because I find it quite interesting to see where we've come from, where we are at now, and where we're going. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the time really focusing on how do we build an enrichment program, what are some of the things we need to do, depending on where you are at your facility, because everyone is at, I guess, different places. So this is a very rough outline of a bit of how enrichment has evolved and a bit of the history. And I have only picked a few key players here, but I should say that there are a lot of people and a lot of facilities and a lot of individuals and groups that have really played a part in building the enrichment community and the animal community into what it is today. So I apologize if I have left anyone out of this, but the idea is just to get a rough idea. Because what I found really interesting when looking at the history is that even when we look back to the 20s, so that's a long time ago, that's nearly 100 years ago, you know, there is this concept of understanding that animals are needing some sort of enriched environments. It might not have been called that back then, and we might not have understood it in the same way, but this is an evolving, I guess, process. So I find that quite interesting. So we'll start at I'm going to really quickly go through it. We'll start there in the where is that? The 20s with Robert Yerkes. He was a psychobiologist, and he founded the first non-human primate research lab in the US. Now, the interesting thing that he did was he worked with chimpanzees and apes as early as 1920, and he started talking about and writing about actually the importance of enrichment for primates in captivity. So there was definitely this discussion. It was really revolving around primates, and they understood maybe primates need something else in their environment, but the discussions were starting then. I like this video. This is the 1930s. This is New York Zoo with polar bears. And you can see already back then they were trying to provide some sort of activity. It was not called enrichment, but something for their polar bears to interact with. This is just ice frozen into an ice block. I think we still do this today for those that have polar bears, but you can see that thought process was there. If we move along to the 1940s, Donald Hebb, he was working with lab rats, and what was interesting was he took the lab rats home to play with his children, and he found that those lab rats that came home had a different environment, actually behaved better. They had their brain worked differently. They solved test problems more easily. So they started this talking about how you have enriched versus restricted environments, and having these enriched environments made a difference on these animals' behavior. Now, as we start getting to the 50s, you've probably heard now of a few more of these people. Heini Hediger, he was a zoologist and a zoo director, and he starts talking about people and humans being responsible to provide enrichments for animals that are mentally, physically, and socially healthy. So he was already talking about this. We've all heard of B.F. Skinner in terms of training and operant conditioning, but his work also had implications for enrichment because he was working with animals in a lab as well, and he reported that sterile environments he started to see his animals having repetitive stereotypical behaviors. So he started saying, okay, well, you know what? There's something with the animal's environment that affects their behavior as well. As we saw before as well, Glenn Jensen, what I mentioned before with contra freeloading, that started being talked about in 1960. And this next video I love, this is, and I'll leave it playing out loud because this is 1962, I think London Zoo with the seal exercise. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this. I love this. I mean, I worked with marine mammals for a long time, and I wish we had something like this. So this is the 60s. They were way ahead of their time. So have a look at this.
In zoos, they often get fed up. Fed up, that is, with fish they don't have to hunt for. So at London Zoo, they've started a slim cure for Millie. Millie being a 9-year-old seal who used to eat 100 pounds of fish a week without bothering about her daily dozen. Millie's keeper, Mr. Sam Morton, believes this to be the only seal exerciser in the world. It works rather like the hare at a greyhound trip. It provides Millie with the happiest circle of life. Now that more people like looking at her because she races about all the time, instead of wallowing unobligingly, she's naturally more figure conscious.
Fantastic, right? So already back in the 60s, they were looking at ways of encouraging these natural behaviors. And then we get to the 70s, and the famous Hal Markowitz, who discussed behavioral engineering. He was regarded, or still is, as one of the most influential people in the case of zoo animal enrichment. And he was really doing a lot of studies and teaching animals how to get their own food. How can they obtain their own food, make choices in their environments? So already back then, there were these advanced concepts of enrichment, and there's quite a number of books that he wrote and the discussion of behavioral engineering. So talking about how we can build things for animals to be able to use their behavior. And then we get to sort of, I guess, American side of things, where the USDA brought in regulations in 1985 for primate enrichment, and this was nationally regulated. This is this time where we're starting to see, Europe has as well, Australia has as well, regulations and laws that say you need to provide captive animals with some sort of enrichment, something to be able to promote their behaviors. We also move on then to the shape of enrichment. And then in 1993, the first ever International Congress of Environmental Enrichment at Oregon Zoo. And now we're starting to get this enrichment community. We're starting to share ideas. We're starting to share research, a more scientific approach to enrichment, and more formalized enrichment programs. So you can see it's a bit of this journey that we've been on in the zoo industry. But now we get to where we are in the last 10 to 20 years, where enrichment is part of every zookeeper's language. We have international regulations, European standards, Australian standards, US standards. Enrichment's built into EAZA, 𝗘𝗹𝗆, EAZA, all our regulatory bodies. We have formalized programs within our zoos. There's been books published, research done, and it really is part of, I guess, the animal care culture now and what it means to look after animals. So if we quickly have a quick look at what that means from behavior-wise for animals. So in the beginning, we have animals in zoos, but no attention's really given to their psychological, their behavioral needs. But when we start paying attention and researchers and zookeepers begin to pay attention to the animals, they start observing that some needs may not be met, and that might be why animals are getting stereotypic behaviors and they maybe are having problem behaviors. We start talking about this term environmental enrichment. And in the beginning, we focused on modifying an animal's environment. Does it look like the wild, but is that making any change to their behavior? Now we start understanding that we need to put challenges into their life so that they can utilize their natural behavior in their environment that they're in. And instead of talking about just giving something for animals to do, we start talking about the behavior side of them encouraging their natural behaviors. What are behaviors they need to survive? And we're making taking a more scientific approach, I should say, basing decisions on research about the natural behaviors of specific species, about specific individuals, and making sure that observations and collaboration is all a part of this as well. And so if you look at this picture here on the top left there, I think that's Copenhagen Zoo. Someone can tell me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it's back in the day. It's in black and white. It must be old. And you can see it's a great photo of the penguins. And they're having their enrichment. Penguins need to be wet. They're getting their watering can. And you move that over to this video on the right, from the penguins standing there having water poured over them to now being able to choose if they want to go in, right? That choice. That choice of whether or not they would like to go under the sprinkler. So we still, that same opportunity, now the penguins choose to. We can look at that enrichment on the left there with the ostrich and the giraffe there. As a keeper standing there blowing bubbles, whatever we're trying to encourage there, maybe a bit of fun for the animal, whatever that might be. To this video on the right from the Reed Park Zoo with their Andean bear. You can see that is a bubble machine. So very same behavior as we see in the photo on the left. The difference is they had a motion sensor. You can see that motion sensor on the left there. And the bear learns that when it walks past that motion sensor, the bubbles come out. So interacting with that bubbles, maybe it's exploratory, maybe it's play, but now we're moving over from that choice whether to participate to actually having control over participating. And you can see this whole journey that our zoo industry has taken. So I thought when I was preparing for this, I'd take a bit of stock of where we're at and where zoos are at. So I went and visited that great zookeeping peer-reviewed journal called Facebook. And I've taken stock of what most of the questions are, what most of the discussions are, and we can see where we're at. We're in the middle there. So on the left, we used to, in this little graph over here, on the left, we used to really be item-based. We used to, what enrichment are we giving our animal? Did you give the animal enrichment today? It was really an added extra. It wasn't part of our routines. Now we're in that middle with that behavioral goals. We understand we need goals for our behaviors. We understand it's a holistic approach. It's part of what we do. And on the right there, we're moving towards, I guess, more experiences and process-based. So if you look at the little graph or table on the right, what does it mean from where we have been to where we're going? So we were in the past being very item-based for enrichment. It was, as I mentioned, what enrichment do you want to give your animal today rather than what behaviors should I encourage? Did I tick the enrichment box today versus what did I do to improve the welfare of my animal? Back in the past, how can I stop my tiger from pacing? But now we're looking at what is the function of the pacing? What is the motivation or the function of that behavior? Can I replace it with another behavior that fulfills that same function? Or I don't have time to do enrichment today versus enriched husbandry is just part of the routine. It's what we do. Any ideas of what enrichment I should give the animal today versus what we do now? I'll check the calendar, what behavioral goals we have set or what's planned. So where most people are at today is in the middle. We've moved away from enrichment being oh, I need to do enrichment today, I don't have time, or it's an item, just throw anything in, to being more planned, more structured, more science-based, more focused. And we're moving forward as well. So I wanted to look at quickly one more slide before I go into the practical aspects of how we actually can implement enrichment, because I just wanted to quickly talk about where we're heading. So I will spend the rest of the time talking about where we're at and how to improve where we're at, but we are heading quite quickly into different directions. But I think it's really important that no matter where you are, where your facility is, everyone's at different places. I think the journey is important. We've seen where we've been, where we are, where we're going. And I don't think there's any need to, I guess, skip the steps, because the process and the understanding is really, really important. But one of the things you've probably heard out there is about enriched experiences, and that is being, I think, led by San Diego Zoo. They talk about it not just being about an event of enrichment, it's talk about, you know, what experiences do the animals have in their day-to-day life? What's everything around, you know, say a feeding an animal getting food. At the moment, that experience is related around the keepers. The cues that they're getting fed comes from us walking past, our keys jangle, we open the lock. They pick up on the cues from us and what we do. But how can we change those cues to be environmental cues? So for example, this is a meerkat. What would be an environmental cue for animals in the wild that they would have to go dig for food? Well, maybe it's a very windy day and there's lots of wind, and so then all the leaves fall. Then when all the leaves fall, underneath it is when the worms and everything comes out, and they provide those experiences. So they might, you know, provide some fans with lots of wind, and then all the leaves fall into the exhibit and it's covered in leaves, and then underneath that is a digging experience. So what starts to happen is the animals pick up on these environmental cues rather than the keeper-led ones. So it's very, very windy. They feel this wind. They see the leaves. Those are the experiences that they're having. And that leads to a lot more, I guess, interaction and natural behaviors. Another thing where we were heading is making sure that we're evidence-based, we're evaluating, we're analyzing, we're understanding our strategies and what their outcomes are. And one of the biggest things is that we're meeting all taxa. So we're not just doing our primates and our elephants and our sea lions and our mammals. We're really focusing on our invertebrates, on our fish, our aquariums as well. So I love this video. This is from the Boston Museum of Science. And this is a bit of an enriched experience. Have a look at this.
Today, we are giving a rainstorm to our jungle nymphs. A lot of sounds and textures go on naturally in the wild, especially during a rainstorm. So what we're going to do is set up this speaker. So it's kind of like a thunderstorm is rolling into their environment. And along with the sound, starting to wake up a little bit. So it's like the thunderstorm is happening right above them. Gonna pick up on the intensity a little bit and see how much more active they get. Then after a while, you let the thunderstorm slowly roll away. Lower the rain, lower the sound. Let them enjoy the after effect, which is just drinking off the leaves, exploring all the new smells from all the wet sticks and dirt. So because the soil is now moist and it's a little bit warmer, that female is sticking what's called an ovipositor, the egg-laying sphere, into the dirt and laying some eggs.
Okay, great. So you can see it's a bit of a combination of what we've been talking about, that experience, those environmental cues, but that's almost where we're heading. And a lot of facilities are doing these experiences now. But what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this, for the next 15 minutes or so, is really how we can implement our goal-based, behavior-based strategies, how we can make sure that we're analyzing and looking at it correctly so we're providing the best welfare for our animals. So when we talk about goal-based or behavior-based enrichment, we talk about planning and implementing enrichment with the goal of encouraging species-specific behaviors. We're looking at the species, we're looking at the individual, and we're being very, very clear about what behaviors we'd like to encourage. So really moving away from that item-based to more goal-based. So they're outcome-based, they're behavior-driven. I'll play this video as I talk. This is from Uriel, one of the keepers at the Jerusalem Zoo, put this together. And you can see every behavior here has a goal. So for example, you know, what the goal might be, I think this is an orangutan coming up now. The goal behavior, you can see there, encourage climbing to the top of the exhibit and using tools at higher locations. This is an enrichment they gave. So behavioral goals are based on the natural history of the animal and also the individual needs of that particular animal. We want to identify what behavior we want to promote and then think about what can elicit this behavior. So that's the concept of behavior-based or goal-based enrichment. And we'll look at some of the ways and systems and processes that we can do to get there and get a really good program up and running. Okay. So there's quite a number of tools out there that can help with this. Two of the ones that I find really great is the first is the spider one, which I'm going to go through. That's the one on the left. But on the right, this is from Wild Welfare and Wild Enrichment. You can find this resource on their website, and it's also been translated into quite a number of languages. And it talks about this process of how you can plan goal and behavior-based enrichment, how you can implement it, how you can analyze it, and then how you can readjust it as well. Similarly, the spider one, which we use, it stands for setting the goals, planning, implementing, documenting, evaluating, and readjusting. And it's just a way of going through and making sure that we're planning and looking at the outcomes of behavior, the outcomes rather than the inputs first. We're looking at what behaviors we want rather than what we want to give. So one of the first steps when doing this is the setting goals, first part, setting goals and planning. So one of the first things we like to do is create behavior lists for our animals. So we choose a species, choose an animal. We want our enrichment to be goal-oriented, behavior-oriented, because then we can know it's effective. If we say we want to encourage a certain behavior and we provide enrichment, we can then tell straight away, did we encourage that behavior or not? So it is really great for knowing whether it's effective. We can create these behavior lists. What does the animals, how does they spend their time? What do these behaviors look like? Can we break these behaviors down into smaller behaviors? And one of the ways we do this is watching videos of these animals in the wild. We watch the animals on exhibit. So we might find some behaviors there that we don't want to encourage, which is really helpful as well. We can compare wild activity budgets to captive activity budgets and see what do these animals spend time doing in the wild? What do they do here at the zoo? Do we want to match that up more? What do we need to encourage more or not? This is a great team activity. We can brainstorm together in teams. You can see there at the top right there, there's a what we call behavioral categories. So this is from Oklahoma City Zoo. They use these categories. And so they use that to help their brainstorming. So they sit together, or what are some behaviors this animal needs to gain resources, to get food, to get water, to get shelter? What are some behaviors they need? What are some rest behaviors? What are avoidance behaviors? And you can see once you start looking at it like this, it's really quite easy to start brainstorming these behaviors that these animals would naturally do in the wild. I've put a little QR code there. That's a link to Disney, have a great enrichment website, and they have a goal setting questionnaire. So similar, they ask all these questions and they just lead in questions to get you brainstorming. And it's a great tool to be able, if you're getting together, to be able to sit and brainstorm and think, what are the behaviors that we want to encourage? What are some of these behavior lists of our animals? And once you've done this, you end up with these behavior lists, and then you can start looking at what behaviors do you want to increase? What behaviors would you like to decrease? What behaviors do you need more of? And you can start thinking, okay, now I can start thinking about behavioral goals. So once you know the behaviors that your animals naturally do in the wild, what they're doing at the zoo, you can start setting behavioral goals. So obviously you need to keep natural history in mind, individual history in mind, but these goals can be anything simple, such as increase arboreal activity, or you can be very specific, increase foraging to 20% of the day. So these allow you to have clear goals to then plan what enrichment strategies you would like to use. So once you have your behavioral goals, you can start thinking, well, how can we encourage these behavioral opportunities? How can we add variety for these behavioral opportunities? Is there novelty we can include in the day? One of the things, I've just put that spider monkey, 𝗘𝗹𝗆 𝗡𝗲𝗄𝗆 on the right there, because I love that video. That's from Perth Zoo. I just find it's got so many different, I guess, goals and behaviors in there that I really enjoy watching it, so I thought I'd put there for you. One of the things that you can use is the shape of enrichment has what's called the categories of enrichment. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Things such as social, cognitive, food, environmental, or sensory. So just to make sure that we're not using food all the time, that we can also use cognitive, strategies to meet these behavioral goals. Can we use sensory strategies to meet these behavioral goals? And just making sure that we're adding that variety and novelty into the environment. And also safety is a big thing. I mean, we can do a whole hour webinar on safety and enrichment, but just to always be thinking of safety. So now we have our behavior lists, we have our behavioral goals, we've started thinking what strategies we want to use. So then we can start putting our behavioral goals and then underneath list each strategy. Basically ideas, this is where we start thinking about item use or environment use or how they use their habitat to how to meet those specific goals. So for each behavioral goal, we brainstorm which strategy we'd like to use, making sure that it's varied, novel, safe, all those things, and we can describe it. Another thing that people do like to use are putting this sort of into a calendar, and that sort of makes it help it with variety. So I've got two different examples there. On the right, and I've added a QR code, that's a link to the Citizen Welfare Institute. They've got an amazing document, if anyone works with any parrots, and that you can see how they've set out their calendar with behaviors within it. You can see the different behaviors throughout the day, and then there's a list of different strategies to meet those behaviors. Similar one on the left, that's for an ocelot. Similar things, every day is a different behavior to encourage, and then how they're going to, what strategy they're going to use. It's also really, really important, once we've done that, is to sort of document, evaluate, and then readjust our strategy. So what are we documenting? Well, we're looking at, were our behavioral goals met? Did the animal do the behavior that we set, that we wanted? Was it the amount of time that we needed? Was it where we needed it? Do we need to change anything in that enrichment to meet those behavioral goals? So using all these things, we can then start building up this behavioral repertoire and these behavioral needs of the animals, and then moving towards positive welfare using with that. So a few ideas there. I did want to end off with some key components of a good enrichment program and a few ways of the human side. I did promise you the human side of it, and I'm conscious of time. So for the next 5 minutes, just to quickly look at how we can set ourselves up and our teams up to provide these enrichment programs in the best way that works for the benefit of the animals. So what's really important is it's setting and communicating goals with all the staff directly and indirectly involved with enrichment, and making sure everyone understands that we have these common goals, what's involved, what we're aiming for. We need to look at the human side, because obviously at the end of the day, the animals within the zoo are within human care. And we do need buy-in from all staff, which can be a bit of a challenge. But that's what most people say is challenging for them, that, getting everyone to be on board, everyone to be consistent. But there's a few strategies to be able to do that. And start thinking, what did I do? What can I do to improve our animals' welfare today? What change do we as humans need to do to make that happen? So even though we know that we need to provide enrichment and good welfare for our animals, how we actually do that is quite a challenge. And so to look at, there's actually a really good paper. It's called Why Enrichment Practices in Zoos Difficult to Implement Effectively. And I think I've put it in my references at the end. And I think they've spoken about it before in some of the EAZA webinars. And there's a few things that have come up. And when looking at keeper discussions, what are some of the issues? So sometimes motivation, how do we overcome that? Well, maybe keepers aren't motivated because it's not part of the routine. It's an added extra. So we need to make sure that it's part of it. We need to be committed to keep on track. What happens when people do their job well? That's also a thing. I don't have time, or I forgot, but that's how do we make the right behavior easier? We talk about animals all the time. How do we make the right behavior easier? Let's talk about it for us. What prompts can we put in there to make sure that that we can set it up well? We saw an enrichment calendar before. I'll show you this quick video. It's a 2-minute video, and then I'm pretty much finished. It talks about some strategies to set your enrichment up or your enrichment routines up so that you can prompt the keepers, the environment set up well for them to do their job properly, and making sure our keepers have correct skills. So it all comes down to planning, using calendars, using rooms to help you out, like enrichment rooms, lists of ideas, making the processes and systems easy to use so that we make the right behavior for the keepers easier. So this video is just 1 or 2 minutes. It's Lincoln Park Zoo, how they set up their enrichment, and then I'll finish up. So sorry, Ellen, give me 2 more minutes. Thanks.
So first up, we have our novel scent enrichment section. So here you can see we have alphabetized a variety of spices for all of our animals to indulge their sensory experience with. And right next to it, we have a slew of perfumes, tons of options so that we're never using the same ones. And again, we've got a number system so that we can track the animals' responsive and kind of get an idea of which might be crowd favorites or which one didn't have the biggest reaction. So then we try to keep it really organized. We are moving on to our paper section. We've got a variety of paper and cardboard options. We do have everything from really tiny small tubes to boxes, paper bags, and then we move on to larger varieties of boxes as well. You can see we have these laundry carts here, and these are to help us push around our more heavy-duty items and protect those backs. We do prep enrichment a day ahead of time, so it's ready for us to go in the morning. In the middle here, we have our large barrel section. This one has been really fun. We set up towers and fill them with water and bubbles, all kinds of things like that. And then this is kind of our ball section. We did split some of them in half, which has been really, really fun for the animals to knock around. And then we also have tons of things like corrugated tubes, donuts, boxes cut in half barrels. And then you can see over here, we have some of our smaller items as well. Some of those not as heavy duty, but very cat friendly plastic items.
All right, it does go on a bit longer, and I know we all have enrichment envy right there. But if you guys, that video is on YouTube. You can look up Lincoln Park Zoo enrichment. It was part of ABMA Behavior Month in 2022. So have a look at it, because she does go on to talk about how they set up their system so keepers know what behavior they're trying to encourage and what enrichment is trying to encourage that behavior and system in place. So it's just quite a nice way of tying it all together, that it's not that we're looking at the behavior, we're focusing on behaviors, but we're also trying to make the right behavior for the keepers easier as well. So where to from here? I would suggest identify where your zoo is up to. Where in this journey, this enrichment journey, are they up to? Because, and how do you move forward on it? Plan for what you'd like your program to look like in the short term, the long term. Who works with that? Is it individuals? Is it enrichment committees? Is it every section? How do you want to plan that? How do you get understanding and buy-in from your staff and from your facility? Identify what planning processes, tracking tools, templates you need. There are a lot of resources out there. Please don't hesitate. I'll put my email address afterwards at the end. Contact me and I can provide you, or just put you in the right direction with lots of resources. Everyone is sharing. I'm in this community right now. What barriers to success you might have, and how can you eliminate those? And most of all, enjoy this enrichment journey, because it's still going, and I think we'll be back here in a few years with the next part, because it's moving very quickly. So enjoy. Some resources here, you'll see that on the recording, or we can send you the PDF as well if you would like. Sorry, Ellen, for running late, but thank you very much, and I'd love to answer some of your questions.
Thank you so much, Elly. That was a fabulous presentation. Really enjoyed it. I think just the first thing to say actually was it was really fabulous seeing enrichment obviously being used for welfare, but also being used in terms of that conservation perspective as well, and those conservation benefits. I think it's really important to just highlight, you know, across the zoo that there are significant benefits for animals as individuals, but also real benefits for the species as well. So that was fabulous. Got a question here, which quite related actually to that last slide. Which methods would you suggest for enrichment evaluation which are efficient for keepers to use when they don't feel they've got time for sort of continuous behavioural observations? We obviously don't want this to be onerous across the section. What's your advice on how best to do that?
Yeah, so there's quite a number of ways of evaluating. I think one of the best ways of evaluating, or not the best, but what we're trying to look at to evaluate is, are your behavioural goals being met? How often? The times, you know, etc. And so what we find works well for us at the zoo, we're using Google forms. So you can make it into a quick Google form, and your Google Forms actually can automatically put those into those graphs. A lot of people use Excel. If you want some ideas of Excel templates that do this as well, I can send you if anyone wants. But the idea is that you input your records, you know, what was the date, what was the goal behavior, what was your category, what was the time given, what was the outcome, and you can automatically set it up to graph it for you. So there's graphs that I showed you a few slides ago. I know I rushed through it a bit, but you can see they were analyzing, okay, what category of enrichment was this? So are we using food too much for enrichment? Are we using sensory too much? What were the goal behaviors that we encouraged? Okay, well, it seems like our goal behavior of foraging we're doing every single day. Maybe we need to meet other goal behaviors, or even break foraging down into smaller behaviors so we can encourage those natural behaviors more. Are you looking at exhibit use? Where in the exhibit the animal is interacting with this, if you're trying to encourage the animal to use different areas of the exhibit, for example. So the most practical seems to be these online based, you know, sort of Google Forms. Quickly, you got your phone, make a little form, fill out your evaluation there, and then it analyzes it automatically. Other people are using, as I said, the Excel. That takes a bit more. You need to either get onto a computer, but you can set up your, I don't know what the word is, but you can set up your evaluation so it automatically evaluates it for you. And there are quite a number of templates out there that zoos have used and have shared that you can make your own. And so if anyone wants to reach out, I can forward those to you. But there's, as I said, like Oklahoma City Zoo have shared theirs. I think London Zoo have shared something similar that they use. A few other places have shared in different forums where the way that they evaluate, and you can pretty much use those templates as well.
Amazing. Thanks, Elly. Yeah, are we okay to drop your email address in the chat for that, actually? So would that be okay? Fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question. If I just want to invite Julia to unmute, and you can ask your question, Julia.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, this is Julia from Association of Zoological Gardens in Berlin. Thanks, Elly, for the interesting talk, and to EAZA for putting up this webinar. Great idea. Just when I have one question that's more like strategic, how to set it up in institutions. When you showed the video where you had this big room of like one, you know, with all the enrichment stuff, and we all got very envious, yes. I was wondering, does it make sense strategically to plan to have one staff in the zoo being responsible, sort of an overhead enrichment, you know, someone who's really looking in different sections of the zoos? Or would you rather say the keepers in each sections have the knowledge of their animals and their needs and stuff, and they should rather do it per section? It's a bit of a logistic question, but I think I was just wondering whether you have any experiences which might work better. I mean, obviously it's an institution issue, but still.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I should mention that at Lincoln Park Zoo, that was just their carnivore department. So there was only one section. It wasn't for the entire zoo. For what I see working really well everywhere in most places, is that every section is almost running their own programs, but oversight by someone, whether that's their welfare coordinator or the enrichment coordinator or the behavioural husbandry coordinator. So, and every zoo is different. I mean, we all have our challenges. Don't get me wrong. We all have challenges no matter where you work, and some sections like to work differently as well. So what seems to work well is having someone responsible within a section. Doesn't mean they have to do it, but someone that it's always part of their responsibility. That seems to be best practice in most places. So that person doesn't mean they have to be setting all those goals or making sure it's happening and doing it, but they are overseeing it and making sure that what needs to happen happens. And so when we talk about that human side of enrichment, that's where that comes in. Having, you know, monthly updates by that person, or having someone, you know, making sure that those enrichment calendars are prepared every month or whenever they do it, and making sure that if something needs to be ordered, someone is responsible. Most places do find that having someone within each section responsible for that helps, but having oversight for the whole zoo to try and make sure that everyone is speaking that same enrichment language and welfare language. But it is a challenge. I mean, we have it in our zoo as well, where we have some sections that are really, you know, motivated and really keen, and some sections where they do find it more challenging. We've recently started a training and enrichment team to try build up key skills and values and resources within a team that then go out to it's a member from each section. So we're building the skills in those individuals that they then go give those skills to their team. And it seems to be quite motivating for them and for the team as well. So I'll let you know how that goes next time. But yeah, we do find that having someone present on the section helps with that, but an oversight as well.
Okay, thank you.
Do you think, just linked to that, would there be benefit from sort of having like an enrichment working group as well? So have sort of an agreed template, a process, an evaluation process or whatever, and then each department in the zoo is sort of adapting that to meet their own needs, but you have got somebody you've got a representative from all of those different groups, but you've kind of got some place to start?
Yes, and I think sharing of ideas and planning is really helpful as well. I don't know, on one of my slides, I had a photo of our team from the Jerusalem Zoo, and they were actually, it was an elephant keeper, a bird keeper, and a primate keeper, and they were all doing enrichment planning for a rhino iguana. So it was an animal they knew nothing about, but bringing that sort of value from people that actually don't know the animal sort of gives an outside look, and that collaborative work does help as well. But yeah, as an institution, I think, or a facility, trying to work towards common goals and having, I don't want to say standardized, but having, you know, what are our common welfare and enrichment goals, I think is really helpful in moving forward for that as well. Great,
thank you. Just another question that's come in. What are your sort of thoughts on how much we should aim for a wild animals activity budget? Now, that was mentioned earlier on in your talk, but you know, if you're thinking about behaviours, say that maybe we don't see so much of in a zoo, so things like say if we look at giraffe, they don't need to be as alert in a zoo, so they may be spending more time resting. How do we consider that in the planning? What bits of the wild we actually need to carry over?
And I really like that question, because it's also often people ask that question like, well, why don't we have like threats, or, you know, an animal in the wild, they have predators. And I was recently listening to a podcast, I think it was a wild enrichment podcast, and Dr. 𝗘𝗹𝗆𝘆 was the guest on it. And he was talking about, you know, maybe behaviors that they need to survive. Obviously, if there's a predator coming and you need to be on alert, otherwise you will die. But if that predator is not there, you don't need to be on alert. Whereas if you're hungry, you need to eat to survive. So there's some behaviors that are triggered by other environmental factors. And if those environmental factors aren't present, then you don't really need that behavior. So I think that idea of sort of prioritizing what these behaviors that animals not only need to survive, but evolutionary, which are the most important behaviors that an animal needs. So yes, an animal, that innate behavior, tigers need to be able to, you know, hunt and move and travel. Otherwise, we do see problem behaviors within zoos. But which behaviors are more important for an animal? Which one is more important, whether it's evolutionary, to survive, for their mental well-being, and sort of giving them that. So we can't directly say, yes, this is a wild activity budget, we have to copy this, because some of those behaviors might not be needed. So I guess it does depend on the context as well. And which is why when I spoke a little bit about San Diego Zoo and the enriched experiences, a lot of their research and their behavior is based on the context of what behaviors happen in. So, you know, a giraffe being on the lookout is in the context of a predator being present. If that context is not there, we might not need that behavior. So breaking down behaviors from the basic form of, I guess what I spoke today was quite the basic form of what behaviors, to actually, when do those behaviors occur? What is the context? What's happening around the animal? What happens before? What happens after needs to be looked at a bit more. So I don't know if I answered that or not, but I do suggest listening to that podcast. It was quite recent, and that will answer that question a bit more as well, in much nicer words than I used.
No, they were fabulous words. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really good. So we are bang on time. Sally will be cross with me if we overrun, so I will wrap up. Just a huge thank you, Elly. That was really fantastic. It was a brilliant way to start our 2024. There's lots of thank yous in the chat, so please do have a little look at those. And thank you to you all for joining us today. I've popped the animal welfare Facebook page and the EAZA general Facebook page into the chat, so please do follow those, and all of our other talks are available on YouTube. You can get those links to those Facebook pages as well. Thanks everybody.